Welcome or welcome back to my channel if you're new here. My name is Mary, and today's video is going to be my bops and flops from the first quarter of 2021.
I should've told you that I loved you one more time.
So I was inspired to make this style of video because a lot of people do their quarterly wrap-ups rather than monthly wrap-ups. I do monthly wrap-ups as well, but in this video I'm just going to be talking about some of my favorite and least favorite books that I've read during the first quarter of the year. I stole the title Bops and Flops. I got that title from Audra at Home, who makes beauty content here on YouTube. I will link her channel down below, but she does this for her monthly favorites about new makeup that she tried. But I am going to be doing this about books that I've read. So these are not all of my top books. They're not all of my 5-star reads for the first quarter, and they're not all of my 1 and 2-star reads. I've got a couple of 3 stars thrown in. I haven't had that many 1 and 2-star reads so far this year, thankfully. So the first bop that I have for you, if you will, is In Order to Live by Yeonmi Park. This is a memoir about a girl who escaped North Korea through sex trafficking in China when she was about 13 years old. She escaped with her mother, and her older sister escaped before her, but this is just the memoir of her time getting out of North Korea. She talks a little bit about her childhood in North Korea and what that was like, and then her time in China, and then trying to get back to South Korea. And the book ends with her living in Seoul and what it was like to adapt to quote-unquote normal life. I think this book is super powerful, and Yeonmi Park actually has some talks on YouTube, so I'll link some of those down below. She's a really proficient public speaker, and I believe she lives in Chicago now. I could be incorrect about that, but I think she lives in the US. But it's just a really powerful story, and it's definitely a book that I think if you are interested in history or biographies or memoirs, you should definitely check that one out. So the first flop I have to talk about is The Friend Zone by Abby Jimenez. This is a contemporary romance set in the Los Angeles area. And it follows Kristen, who is 24, and she has this long-term boyfriend who is I believe a Marine, but I could be wrong about that. He's about to be up on his contract, and so she told him that she will stay with him if he doesn't re-sign, but if he re-signs, their relationship is over. And Kristen, meanwhile, is trying to plan her best friend Sloane's wedding, and Sloane is marrying this man Brandon, and Brandon's best friend and the best man is this guy Josh, and Kristen and Josh have a bumpy relationship at the start where they don't really get along, but then Kristen owns her own small business, and so Josh comes and works for her because she needs someone who's proficient at carpentry to make these dog houses and custom dog stairs for little dogs to get on the couch and stuff. Because that's what she does. She does that, and then dog t-shirts. And so she and Josh obviously start forming a relationship, and I had a lot of problems with this book. I gave it 2 stars. I did not enjoy my time reading it. I didn't like either the hero or the heroine of this story very much at all. I found Kristen really annoying to read from her point of view, and I thought Josh was just he's kind of the ultimate macho manly guy, loves to hunt, loves to fish, loves drinking a beer, and I wasn't attracted to him, even in the way that it was written. Nothing that he did was overly attractive or anything that I was interested in, and I found Kristen annoying, like I already said, so I just didn't really enjoy their story at all. But that is my first flop, unfortunately. And then my next bop is Brother by David Chariandi. This is another book that I read back in January. And this is a literary fiction. It's pretty short. I believe it's under 200 pages. I think it's 190 something pages. But this follows a black man living in Canada. And when we meet him, he's, I believe, 30. And he still lives with his mother because he's taking care of her because they have some sort of traumatic things that have happened in their past. And his mom is still dealing with trauma and grief from that. And the book, I don't want to say too much because, like I said, it's a really short book, but it flashes back to our main character's teenage years, and he had an older brother who was very popular, very cool, and he was very much not. It's just about their relationship and sort of what happened to his brother. But that book is amazing. It made me cry, so I highly recommend that to anyone who is a fan of literary fiction or contemporaries. My next flop is actually The Bone Witch by Rin Chupeco. I gave this 3 stars. It was a really low 3-star for me. I listened to this as an audiobook, so I totally think that part of the reason I didn't enjoy this as much as other people have enjoyed this could be because I listened to it as an audiobook, so I didn't get as much out of the story, but I found this one really hard to follow. It's a YA fantasy about Tia, who is a bone witch. She has the powers of necromancy, and in her immediate village, bone witches are feared and often rebuked and shut out from the village. So she goes, in the beginning of this book, when she discovers that she has this ability, she is sent away to learn how to hone her skill and how to be a bone witch, and she's trained by another bone witch. I found the lore in this book really confusing. I also think I would have benefited to having a physical copy so I could look at a map. And I'm actually hoping to read the sequel to this month because I don't know that I gave the Bone Witch a really fair shake by listening to it as an audiobook, and I don't want to just discontinue the series completely because I didn't enjoy my first listen of it. So I am planning on reading the second one physically, and I will let you know, hopefully in my April wrap up, how that went for me. The third bop that I have is You by Caroline Kepnes. This is a thriller. It's the best thriller that I've ever read personally. I haven't read a ton of thrillers, so I don't think that's like a very high bar, but this follows Joe Goldberg, who owns a bookstore in New York, and one day a customer comes into his bookstore and her name is Guinevere Beck, and he decides that he's going to stalk Beck. He gets it into his head that Beck is the only girl in the world for him, and he follows her home and stalks her, and it's about him stalking her, and it's very tense and gruesome at times to read, but I really did just find the story so compelling. I thought the way that the author wrote it, as you are in Joe Goldberg's head and he's talking to you as if you are Beck, I found that really compelling to read about. So again, 10 out of 10 read. I absolutely loved it. The third flop that I have is Candide by Voltaire. This again, I gave 2 stars, but I probably could have given 1 star. This is another really short book. It's only about 105 pages, 103 pages, I think, but it is a satirical philosophy book about Candide, who is this unlucky optimist, and it's about how everything in his life goes terribly wrong. But to me, I think if you'd read it at the time when it was written, it would be a lot more relevant and you would get a lot more out of it. Or maybe if you're more familiar with that time, or if you really enjoy philosophy, you might like it. I don't enjoy philosophy, and I'm not super familiar with the time period and what was going on in the world history, and especially in European history around, I think it was written in the 1700s, or the late 1600s, but ultimately not for me, not the type of book that I would recommend, and I think it's very skippable as far as classics go. I don't think, if you don't have the basis of knowledge that I think is required for that book, I don't think there's a lot you can get out of it. So I did not really enjoy that book, unfortunately. The fourth bop on my list is Song of Solomon by Toni Morrison. And this was actually a book that I read for my vlog. Subscribers pick my books that I read. That is not what that video is called, but I'll link it somewhere so you can watch it if you're interested. But I absolutely love Song of Solomon. It's my second Toni Morrison book that I've read. I also read Beloved a few years ago. This book follows Milkman, who is a young black man living, I always call people young man, young woman, doesn't matter how old they are. Anyways, he's like, I think 30 at the start of this book, or like where the main plot line takes place, and he is trying to sort of figure out his life and what he wants from it. And so he's delving into his family histories, and he has his aunt Pilot, and his dad and his aunt don't speak, but he wants to figure out why that is. So he sort of goes on this, I hesitate to call it a wild goose chase, but it kind of is, where he goes back where he thinks his family came from in the United States, and other places that they have lived, and just learns about his ancestors and about his life. There's a little bit of magical realism in it, but it's not a huge element. Mostly it's just like an epic family tale, and it is told over several generations. You also get points of view of his father and Pilot and his mom, and I just think this book was incredible. I absolutely loved it, and I, again, would highly recommend it. My fourth flop is in that same vlog, and it is Pet by Akwaeke Emezi. Unfortunately, I did not like this book very much. I have since heard, let me back up. So I went into this thinking it was a YA fantasy, and I have since heard that it is actually a middle grade fantasy. It reads a lot more like contemporary than fantasy to me as well, so if that kind of thing bothers you, I didn't know that that was something that bothers me, but I think it does. At least it did in this case. Also, the main characters are supposed to be about 15 or 16, but they read much more like they were 11 or 12. So I think if the characters had been younger, I would not have disliked this book as much, but they were not younger. So it just confused me as to why they would read so young and so immature. This book does cover some heavy topics. I know Ashley at Bookish Realm does a really good job of describing it. She loved this book. And so if you want to hear some of like the positives and why she liked it, I will try to link a video where she talks about it down below, or I'll just link her channel and you can maybe find it from there. I don't know exactly what video she talked about it in, but I do remember her mentioning it recently. All that to say, this book follows Jam, who is a young trans girl living in this made-up community that has banished monsters, and the angels are who are in charge now. They're not real monsters and they're not real angels, they're all just people. And the monsters were like people in the police, people in power who were doing bad things and who were harming people, and then the angels were the other people who were angry about that. I found the metaphor kind of tedious and a little, I found that it was a little bit overwritten, and also just, it didn't work for me. I feel like I was like, yeah, okay, I get it. I don't understand why this is still happening. But again, knowing that I was for middle grade, I think maybe if I knew that going into it, I would have had a different opinion. As it stands, I don't have fond feelings of that book, and I think it's totally skippable. The fifth bop on this list is Packing for Mars by Mary Roach. This is a nonfiction, yet again, about astronauts in space and what it means to go into space. And what I really loved about this book was that Mary Roach has a really good sense of humor, and her tone is very light and easy to read. So she takes kind of complex physics and sciencey things, because it is about space and astronauts, and she makes it very digestible for the average reader who may not have that good of a grasp on physics. If you're like me, I don't have any grasp on physics. I also really enjoyed that she asked the kinds of questions that I don't know that I would have ever thought about. Like, she covers a lot of like how we have toilets working in space in zero gravity, and how astronauts, for a while, we didn't know that astronauts were going to be able to take their spacesuits off in their aircraft at all. And so they had to do studies to figure out what would happen to people if they just were wearing the same clothes for 2 weeks. I talk about that in the vlog where I read my name. I love that book, and I think if you're at all interested in space and just want to learn a little bit of something, but you don't want it to be super dense, I think that's a great book to read. And then the fifth and final flop that I have for this list is Lint by Jo Walton. This is another book that I gave 3 stars. I didn't think this book was terrible. I just think it didn't deliver on what it promised. So this book is supposed to be a fantasy about a Dominican monk living in Florence during the Renaissance, and he's actually able to see demons and cast them back to hell. And the book said that it was set partially in hell and partially in Florence, and the parts in hell are few and far between. So I read it thinking it was going to be different than it was. And I feel like saying what the fantastic, like the actual like fantasy-ish element or like speculative element is besides the demons is a spoiler, so I can't tell you. But, or I'm not going to tell you because I don't want to spoil it for you. I'm sure you could find it and maybe you would like the kind of thing that it is. But I just didn't think it was very fantastical. It felt much more like a character study, which I don't always hate, but I just didn't want that from this, and I didn't care enough about the characters, I think, for it really to make an impact on me. I also don't think, again, I think I lacked the historical context necessary to really enjoy this book. I read a lot more like historical fiction, but I didn't know very much about the history of it, and so for me, it just didn't work for me. And my final bop, because I wanted to start and end on a positive note, is Conversations with Friends by Sally Rooney, which I read in March for my Reading Books that Kira Foster gave 5 stars vlog. I'll have that linked somewhere for you as well. Conversations with Friends is Sally Rooney's debut novel, and I was very hesitant to go into it because I didn't love Normal People. I liked it. I gave it 3 stars. I read it last year. I'll link my review somewhere in case you want to watch that. But I just found it to get kind of tedious and kind of boring as time went on with those characters. But Conversations with Friends is a much shorter time period. I think the novels are the same length, but the time that you're with the characters is not as long, and it is just a character study of Frances, who is a 21-year-old woman living in Dublin. She goes to university there, and her best friend is also her ex-girlfriend, so she's got a lot of feelings about that. And then they meet this couple, Nick and Melissa. Nick is an actor. Melissa is a photographer and writer who wants to do a piece on Bobby and Frances because they do slam poetry together. And Frances and Nick, Melissa's husband, develop a sort of relationship and have an affair. And the book presents the affair in such a like neutral way that I felt like it was much easier to read about, and it felt like Frances was telling you about her life, and there was no judgment involved. There was no, this is good, this is bad, these are good people, these are bad people. Everybody was sort of just presented as is, and I found that to be a very good way of telling that story because it really made you just look at what happened rather than feeling like the author had an agenda to tell you how you should feel about it, if that makes sense. So I did really enjoy that book. I feel like Frances still is like a real character that she feels like a real person to me, and so I just think the writing was really well done in that respect. But it is more of a slice of life book, so if that's not your cup of tea, I don't know if you'd love it, but I obviously really loved it, and I definitely think it's worth picking up if you are, again, a fan of like contemporary stories. But those are my bops and flops from the first quarter of this year. Let me know down below one bop and one flop that you've read from the first quarter of this year. Also, let me know if you've read any of these books and if you have a different opinion than I do. I would love to hear about it. But that's going to be it for today's video. If you enjoyed it, please give it a thumbs up. And if you would like to, you can go ahead and subscribe to my channel. I do post 2 videos every single week about bookish and lifestyle topics. And I will see you in my next one. Bye!
I should have told you